Hello and welcome to Cryptic's first video guide. Today we are going to take a look at the beta and some simple pathing. Here's what you don't want to do. While these tests are fun, they can't tell you anything about your yacht. Mostly because you can't actually see if the pathing is stable. You can't see if your pathing relies on specific buildings standing. So here we got a 34 blocks long wall, and as you can see it pathed well, but the only reason it pathed is because the monster starts so far away from the building. So in a moment we're gonna fix that by trying to put a building up close to the wall. When you test, you really want to use these control point buildings, as I call them, because otherwise you're just not gonna know if your pathing is stable or not. You could also call them a fixed fling point, so you can better simulate a real attack and force the monsters together as they would be in a real attack. And as you can see here, they chew right through it. So testing a yacht. First of all, notice the blue ring. It's a control point building to guide monsters close to the wall to see if the wall there actually paths. And it does. It works fine. Now I'm just going to destroy some buildings just so we can test pathing more easily. Also so they don't just kill your monsters. That's pretty annoying. I'm also adding in some silos, also because buildings can affect pathing. They can narrow it so the wall doesn't work and stuff like that. Also, you need to know that you can't just test a whole yard. You need to test small areas one at a time. So when you test, you have to move a lot of things around all the time. It's pretty annoying, but that's just how it is. Now we're testing with bolts again, just to see if the silo pathing actually works. And somehow they don't want to path through that corridor, and it isn't because it's narrow or anything. I actually tried to force them here, but they still want to path out and inwards again. It's pretty stupid. And here is an example of what happens if you forget to refresh once you've moved a building. Monsters will just go berserk. So remember to refresh, always remember to refresh. Here we got a wall that won't work. The blocks basically doesn't touch each other. And here we got a diagonal wall with 0.25 overlaps and still doesn't work. Buildings touching each other at the very edge won't work. 0.75 overlaps works perfectly well though. So here we have where you test just a regular wall, how long a wall will actually path. And here you can see we have a 15 blocks long wall from the edge of the buildings. That is with no gaps in between buildings and wall, and they don't path. If you just add 0.25 gap on either side of the wall, then they will path. So basically adding gaps or space can add steps to pathing, so they will path longer. Whee! The pokey goes whee! Yeah, so now we're just testing a horizontal wall with 0 gaps in between buildings and wall. And it's 12 blocks long. Basically, horizontal walls always pass 1 block less than vertical walls. And when I speak about vertical and horizontal walls, I'm speaking of how they look in the planner, not how you actually see them in the yacht. Now we added gaps, and now they all of a sudden path 14 blocks. As you can see, sometimes it adds 2 steps, sometimes the gaps only adds 1 step or 1 block. It differs sometimes. It's kind of odd. The pokey goes wee. path faster. Now we're going to look at a wooden wall just to see that blocks at different levels path different distances. So a wooden wall with gaps only path 10 blocks. Now we're going to look at some diagonal walls, and they path a lot less, especially when you don't have space in between. So you can see a black diamond wall only path is 10 blocks, which is extremely short. And now we added gaps. As you can see, buildings touching the wall at the edge doesn't matter at all, at least not if they're only overlapping with 0.25. But now they all of a sudden path 13 blocks, which is almost as long as normal. And now we have a different diagonal wall with 0.75 overlaps. And you saw earlier that they usually work, but sometimes they create ghost walls, and I will get back to that in another video, hopefully. As you can see, this is the procedure you do when you have a ghost wall. You try to move the entire wall or the entire test section 0.25 in one direction, only one direction at a time. It's pretty crucial that you don't move them in two directions, because then you will most likely hit another odd spot in the art. But as I said, I will get back to that later. As you can see, after I moved the entire wall, they still path right through the wall, and just in general try to avoid 0.5 overlaps. They often cause trouble. So here we have a different diagonal wall, also with 0.5 overlaps, and this time we're not having any gaps either. And as you can see, it's only 10 blocks long from the corner of the pebble shiner. Also, I've made a lot of tests, so I tested if you add one block to these tests, they will just chew, at least in this part of the art. Now we added gaps, and now they path 14 blocks, which is still almost as long as a regular wall, regular straight wall, except this type of 0.5 overlapping walls is actually quite a bit shorter than a straight wall. So now we are doing it in the other direction, and this time we have space, and the buildings touch the blocks at the edge, but that shouldn't do anything at all. It's still only path 10 blocks, and I'm not sure why. It might be because of the narrow entrance. Also, I usually use a 1.5 blocks wide entrance just to make sure there's space enough for the monsters to attack. Now we have a 0.75 overlap, and it's still just a ghost wall. These things can be pretty tricky, but as you can see, it's pretty important to test your art, because it's not just given that a 15 blocks long wall will path anywhere. Now we have a diagonal wall with 0.5 overlaps again. This time it only paths 9 blocks, but the buildings are also touching the wall. But at least the wall path. You can't complain about that. Now we added gaps, and as you can see, they now path 12 blocks, so we actually added like 6 steps to the pathing. I usually just calculate it or measure it in blocks. It's just way easier than sitting there and measuring all the steps they take, although each step is 1 block long. Well, that was it. Thank you for watching, and come back next week and see if we've put up a new video.